Why Manon should not come back, and why that's actually her biggest win. What if the worst thing that could happen to Manon is going back? And what if the situation everyone calls a loss is actually her biggest advantage? Because the more you look at what happened, the more it becomes clear. Manon doesn't need them. Let's be real for a second. Most people are looking at this from the wrong angle. They think she didn't make it or she struggled. But that completely ignores what actually happened. Because if you really analyze her situation, her background, and how she was treated, you start to realize she was playing a completely different game than everyone else. Point 1. The lazy narrative makes no sense. Let's address the biggest accusation. Manon is lazy. That argument falls apart immediately. Because Manon didn't come from a K-pop trainee system. She didn't spend years learning choreography, stage discipline, or idol routines. So if she enters that environment and is still able to perform at a comparable level, that doesn't mean she's lazy. That means she had to learn faster, catch up faster, work under more pressure, and adapt in real time. While others were building on years of training, she was building from scratch. So logically, she wasn't doing less work. She was doing double or even triple the work, just to stand next to them. And instead of recognizing that, people flipped it into criticism. Point 2. Racism and bias, subtle but real. Now, let's talk about something people don't want to admit: bias. Whether people like it or not, the K-pop space still has very rigid expectations: how you should look, how you should act, how you should perform. And if you don't fit perfectly into that mold, you get judged harder, you get labeled faster, and suddenly, everything you do gets interpreted negatively. Manon stood out, visually, culturally, energetically. And instead of that being seen as something valuable, it became something people criticized, not always openly, but definitely noticeably. Point 3. She was never meant to fit the system. Here's the bigger truth. Manon was never meant to fit into that system. And that's not a weakness. That's exactly what makes her interesting, because there are two types of artists. Artists who adapt to a system. Artists who are too distinct to be contained by one. Manon clearly falls into the second category. And forcing someone like that into a rigid structure usually kills what makes them special in the first place. Point 4. Her aura is her biggest asset. You can train skills, you can improve technique, but you can't teach presence. You can't teach aura. And that's the one thing people keep noticing about Manon. Even people who don't follow the group closely still remember her. That's not coincidence. That's star quality. And ironically, that kind of presence often stands out more outside of a group than inside one. Point 5. Industry. Support matters more than fan opinions. Another thing people underestimate. Who supports you matters more than who criticizes you. When artists, creatives, or people inside the industry show interest in someone, that says a lot. Because they're not looking at fan narratives. They're looking at marketability, identity, long-term potential. And Manon clearly has attention beyond just the show. That kind of positioning is way more valuable than being one member in a group. Point 6. Group limitations vs. solo potential. Let's talk about the biggest factor. Groups come with limits. Limited screen time, shared identity, fixed concepts, less individual control. Even if she came back, she wouldn't be Manon. She would be a version of herself that fits the group. And for someone whose biggest strength is individuality, that's actually a downgrade. Outside of the group, she has creative freedom, branding control, the ability to build her own image. And that's where people like her usually thrive. Point 7 menos image global appeal. Let's be honest about something else. Manon has a very strong visual identity. Not just in a pretty way, but in a way that stands out globally. There's a reason people compare her presence to major artists. Not because she's the same, but because she has that distinct look and energy that can translate internationally. That's something labels look for, and something that works better outside of a tightly controlled system. Point 8. Timing and long-term strategy. Sometimes, not making it into something immediately is actually better long-term. Because instead of being locked into a contract or concept early on, she has time to develop her own sound, build her own audience, connect with the right people, and enter the industry on her own terms. That's rare. And it's powerful. Personal take. And honestly, I noticed something myself. I didn't follow the whole group, but I followed her. And I know I'm not the only one. That says everything. So maybe this isn't a story about someone missing out. Maybe it's about someone who was never meant to stay in that lane. And the real question is, what happens when someone like that finally builds something on their own? Because if she plays this right, this might just be the beginning.